Ever since I was a teenager, an insatiable obsession with the mysteries of the human body had taken root inside me. But it didn't erupt all at once, no, it crept in slowly, a faint shadow slinking through my mind. It began with lifeless things, remote controls I gutted without mercy, electronics buzzing faintly as I tore them apart, even a bed I dismantled piece by piece just to peer into its hidden workings. I was entranced by the marvel of it all, what made them move, what breathed life into them. A battered old computer became my next victim, its innards spilling out like a galaxy of shimmering stars, humming and trembling under my hands. But I could never piece them back together. The chaos of bolts and broken bits mocked me, and eventually, my parents grew furious with my relentless destruction. They thrust books into my hands, hoping the dry pages would smother the fire of curiosity raging within me. But those words only held me back for so long. After the beatings, the screams, the punishments, I stopped until the anatomy of living things whispered to me. Who hasn't crushed a spider or stomped an ant underfoot? I had, as a child, but I'd never thought to slice them open, to peer into the secrets they hid. Then came that summer day, sprawled in the yard, when our dog Alex dropped a gift at my feet, a rat, still twitching, still alive. I snatched it from his jaws, feeling its fragile body writhe in my grip. I meant to toss it aside, to forget it, but then I felt it, a pulse. A single, faint heartbeat, echoing my own. Something ignited in me, a wild, trembling thrill, a desperate need to know what made it tick, what kept it alive. I darted to the kitchen, seized the sharpest knife I could find, and slipped out to the back patio. On the little table there, I pinned the rat down, the cold blade sinking into its flesh. Blood oozed, dark and warm, but I didn't falter. The knife hit bone, its ribs, and I paused, breath ragged. Without a second thought, I dug my fingernails into the incision, clawing the skin apart. The snap of breaking ribs cracked through the still air, each shard tossed carelessly into the trash behind me. At last, its chest lay splayed open, revealing a tiny, glistening heart, a ruby pulsing faintly in the carnage. I stared, awestruck, but a bitter disappointment sank in. In my frenzy, I'd forgotten, I'd snuffed it out. The heart lay still, lifeless, a broken thing. Rage surged through me, and I slashed wildly, shredding the rat into ribbons, blood and guts splattering across the table. When the fury ebbed, I looked down at my hands, crimson-stained, and the gore-smeared mess before me. Then came the crunch of tires on gravel. My parents were home. I scrubbed the blood away in a panic, hurling the bones and entrails into the woods, erasing every trace. But that hunger didn't fade. It grew, festering inside me as the years slipped by. I moved on to other prey, moles, squirrels, always meticulous, always hidden. All I craved was to see that heartbeat, to understand what fueled life itself. Yet every time my blade cut too deep, that fragile spark flickered out, and I'd lose myself again, mutilating what remained in a blind fury. My secret stayed buried, locked tight, until high school. In biology class, we studied animal anatomy, and the day I'd longed for finally loomed close, the frog dissection. I'd counted the agonizing seconds, my hands trembling with sick anticipation. Frogs didn't linger near my house, so this was a first, a sacred moment. When it arrived, I was dizzy with twisted joy, my pulse racing. We worked in pairs, but I barely registered my partner's presence. My eyes were locked on the frog, and the knife in my hand gleamed, eager to begin. My face must have glowed with a twisted, unholy light when my teacher set that small metal tray before me. Two frogs, their lifeless bodies neatly taped down, stared up at me with glassy eyes. The classroom was carved into little sections, each walled off for privacy, a flimsy shield between me and the others. Beneath each table sat a tiny trash can, waiting to swallow the remains. I slid into my seat beside my partner, the scalpel cold and perfect in my grip. He started prattling on about the steps we were supposed to follow, but his words were a distant hum, drowned by the pounding in my skull. I didn't care. I pressed the blade into the first frog, slicing slow and deliberate at first, savoring every tear of flesh, every glimpse of the glistening insides. My hands trembled with delight as I peeled it apart, inspecting each piece like a treasure. Then something snapped. The careful cuts turned wild, frenzied, a rampage of steel and gore. I hacked and slashed, lost in a growing tide of bliss, the frog dissolving into a mess of unrecognizable sludge. My partner gaped at me, his face a mask of silent horror, but I didn't stop. Soon, the tray held nothing but the second frog and a pile of shredded guts, a grotesque monument to my ecstasy. Calmly, I scraped the mess into the trash can, stood, and walked to the teacher. My voice was steady as I lied, "I need to see the nurse." She nodded, oblivious. My partner never spoke to me again, his silence a faint echo as I left that room. But the hunger, it wouldn't stay buried anymore. It clawed its way out, insatiable. I went to medical school, chasing the dream of becoming a surgeon, but the wait was unbearable. This morning, I called the cable company, voice trembling with fake frustration about a glitchy TV. They sent a technician, a mechanic of wires, not flesh. I told him the TV was in the basement, my lips curling into a smile as I followed him down the creaking stairs. Before he could turn, before he could even ask where the damn thing was, I swung a metal baseball bat. The crack of it against his skull rang like a bell in the dim, musty air. He crumpled, and I dragged him to the bed, binding him tight with leather straps. The butcher knife gleamed as I sharpened it, the scrape of steel on stone a him to what was coming. When he stirred, groaning back to consciousness, I was ready. He thrashed against the restraints as I brought the blade to his hand, tilting it sideways. Slowly, deliberately, I peeled the skin away, flaying it like parchment. I dosed him with painkillers, mercy, I told myself, but his eyes bulged with raw, primal terror. He tried to scream, but the gag choked it into a pitiful whimper. I dug deeper, half an inch into the meat of his hand, stripping away muscle, peeling back skin and delicate curls. Then I reached the tendons, thin, taut strings of life. One by one, I plucked them out, each snap sending a shudder through his frame. When I unstrapped his hand, it dangled uselessly, a broken puppet's limb. He was fading, so I fed him more pills, keeping him teetering on the edge. Then I turned to his legs, repeating the ritual: skin, muscle, tendons, until they were raw, oozing wrecks. Blood pooled freely, staining the sheets, the floor, my hands. Before I could finish, he passed out, his legs falling still. Rage boiled up, the old fury I knew too well. I slashed at his legs, stabbing and tearing until the blade scraped bone, shredding them into ribbons of flesh. I sharpened the knife again, its edge singing, and began severing his fingers, one by one. They dropped like fallen leaves. He died then, as the first finger fell, his breath snuffed out. Frustration clotted me, I hadn't even touched his head, his torso. In a blind fit, I sawed at his face, ripping chunks of flesh, carving a jagged gash from ear to ear. His mouth tore open, and I sliced his throat, yanking his tongue through the wound. I clawed out his vocal cords, cutting along his neck until it was a ruined, gaping mess. But it wasn't enough. Everything died too soon, slipping away before I could truly see. Then a wild, terrible thought struck me: what about me? A grin split my face as I raised the knife to my chest, aiming for the upper left, where my heart thrummed. I swallowed handfuls of painkillers, choking them down, and began to cut. The blade sank in, blood welling hot and thick, and I laughed, a jagged, joyous sound. Deeper I went, carving through muscle and bone, until my trembling hands pulled free a small, red thing. My heart. It gave one final, slow beat, a heavy, shuddering pulse, then stopped. And as the world faded, I felt it, pure, utter joy.